Hi everyone, this is EDIT 5100, Chapter 10, Selecting and Designing a Student's Augmentative Communication System. So I just want to let you know that this chapter focuses on augmentative communication devices, but we've actually reviewed some of it in a previous chapter. So some of this stuff will be more reminding or a refresher, than other things are new considerations. All right, so over the past several decades, augmentative or alternative communication, also known as AAC, systems have become a viable solution for meeting complex communication needs. So we're talking about students or people, users who are nonverbal, depending on whatever level it is. Um, uh, Communication boards or augmentative communication has been very, very useful. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the categories of augmentative communication technology. So there's two types. There's aided, which is use of tools such as a language board or a speech generating computer, which is what our focus is going to be on for this chapter primarily. And then there's unaided, and that is requires no device or external aid. So I would ask, the class, give me an example, right? But basically using gestures and facial expressions to respond to yes and no questions would be unaided because you're just using your face. Or personalized and only familiar people may understand it. The way that you look at someone, let's say the family member, only you two would know what that means, right? So that would be, again, unaided. And another example would be American Sign Language or just sign language in general, which is considered unaided system because it just uses your hands. So if it's just our bodies, then it would be considered unaided. It's essential that the individual's personal approach to expressing themselves be incorporated into the system. So definitely it's not about the parents or the teachers. It's more about how does that child or that user communicate, and then we want to then go around and work with them with their style. So there's different types of categories of augmentative communication technology. The first one is low tech. That's devices that use simple non-electronic aids. Picture boards or communication board with symbols. And it's usually used for beginner users because you're not going to spend $1,000 on a device if you don't even know if this person's going to use it. So you're going to probably use a low-tech version, maybe something that's homemade, maybe something that you buy off the shelf. Serve as a backup for those with mid or high-tech devices. So even if your user has a high-tech device, you might want to have a communication board that's low-tech, just in case, let's say, the battery runs out, the computer crashes, or the tablet crashes, or the smartphone crashes, that you're not left with nothing for that child or for that user to use to communicate with other people. There's also mid-tech. Those are electronic devices that are easy to program. Recorded speech, relatively inexpensive, and the flexibility to use a variety of printed overlays or pictures, symbols, or words. So in this slide right here, if you look at it, it's called the GoTalk 20 Plus. And basically, if you look on the right side, you see a little notch where basically you use your fingers to pull that entire sheet out, and then you can actually put another one in. So when you press down on any of those things, it would actually say the corresponding thing. So you must be wondering, well, how does the device know that? Usually there's a little a barcode that it scans inside, and it'll know this is sheet number 1, sheet number 2, and what the words are corresponding to it. And you'll probably see this in a basic format when you see like little children's books where you read it and then there's like a little symbol of, like, let's say a chicken, and then the child presses the picture of the chicken on the side of the book, and then the chicken noise will go buck 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 or whatever it is, right? So that's kind of similar to what this one is. And I just want to say, mid-tech, when it says electronic devices that are easy to program, I know you guys think that the tablet is really easy to program, but it actually is a very high-tech device. An iPad, a computer, those things are actually high-tech versions, and we'll talk about that next. So mid-tech would be something that's more basic. It's not necessarily a computer. It might be some sort of little board in there that reads it and is able to do a digital, let's say, outspeak of the words, but it doesn't necessarily is like a computer. So then, of course, high-tech would be specialized computers that offer many features and options, such as a dynamic display. And dynamic display basically means, let's say you have one sheet that you're looking at on an iPad, and when you press it, it goes into another page and it automatically appears, right? It's kind of like when you're on a website and you click next, it'll go to the next page. So that's what dynamic display means. That means on the same display, you can move it around and adjust it. It's flexible. Use recorded speech and synthesized speech, touchscreen display. Wi-Fi allows for email, internet, environmental controls, and they're also known as smartphones, iPads, Android-based tablets, laptops, computers. All those things would actually be considered high tech. All right, so let's talk about how it must reflect traditional methods of communication. So what is a traditional method of communication? It's you two talking to each other, right? You and another person going, hi, and the other person goes, hey, and then you're like, how are you doing? And then the other person says, I'm doing all right. So that's typical methods of communication. So when you use an augmentative communication board or device, you're gonna wanna try to mimic that. Okay, remember, this is how people communicate. So number one, the person's able to construct a message using their symbols. 2, deliver the message to another person who's a receiver. Respond to the receiver's reply in a timely manner, and then must enable the user to initiate and sustain a conversation with another person. So it has to go back and forth. It's not just a one thing reply like, hi, how are you? And then the person just says fine, and that's it. No, it's going to be a more complex conversation that goes back and forth, just like, you know, everyone else does when they communicate with each other. So those are things that you want to keep in mind when you develop, let's say, some sort of board or recommend a specific type of board for a specific student. So let's talk about the considerations in system selection and design. So here are some myths that people think of, and actually I've even heard some of the students in class say these things, and we had to correct this myth, this assumption, which is incorrect. So AAC will inhibit a person's further development of speech, so it should be used only as a last resort. And that's actually not true. There are studies that actually say that when using it, because you can hear it a lot and the vocalizations are there, that children and users actually may eventually learn how to imitate those sounds and then communicate. Whereas before, where the person is not talking to anyone or anything at all, there's not a lot of vocalization, there's no auditory simulation and all that stuff that may potentially encourage a child or a user to start speaking. Specific levels of cognitive abilities are required. It is not true. It's a vast variety of people who can use augmentative communication devices. Must present specific skills such as eye contact and purpose. Nope, that is again not true and requires a certain level of literacy skills. Sorry about that. And so that's not true because a lot of communication boards actually just have pictures, right? And so then that means that they don't necessarily need to read to be able to communicate with other people, which is a major issue, right? All right, here are the collaborative team members that would help you decide on what device to use. The students obviously should be the center, the teachers, parents and their family members, an expert on augmentative communication, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, the physical therapist, information technologist support, so a person who can answer questions about the device, and then of course the peers of the student. So how should the team assess features a collaborative assessment and process? And we've already introduced you a little bit to the SET framework, but if you don't remember, click on this link and it does a YouTube video that briefly and quickly and efficiently explains what SET stands for, which is basically student, environment, tools, and then tasks as well. So just look at that so that you are briefly reminded. This is the version of an assessment that the book talks predominantly about. Although there are other types of assessment, this is a very popular one. So which components must be identified? Symbols, vocabulary, and access method. So these are now, we're going to start to analyze the different components of a communication device or board. There are 3 major decisions: the symbol system to be used to represent the vocabulary. So that means, are there photos, are there illustrations, are there words? 2, the specific vocabulary the student will express with the system. So what kind of words are they actually going to use? And 3, the method by which the students will access the system. So again, is it a paper one? Is it a one with an overlay like we talked about in the mid-tech? Or is it going to be a high-tech device? And when we talk about vocabulary and language, we're talking about also slang, okay? So if your kids or your students or users are, let's say, Gen Z, and they like to use different words like GOAT, which stands for greatest of all time, you might want to actually put that into the communication board so that they don't sound like they're out of touch with everyone else. Let's say that they want to say it's lit, which basically means it's amazing. So these slang words you need to also pay attention to see if their peers are using it, and if so, then we want to include those words in there too. So instead of saying, hi, how are you doing today, which is what most people will not be saying, you might add one that says, what's up, okay? All right, so now let's talk about how symbol systems are selected. They're arbitrary. Arbitrary just basically means it's random. There's no necessary connection. Representation of a concept that speakers of a language agree has a specific meaning. So just think about letters, right? Letters are very abstract. So let's say you put the word D-O-G, that spells out dog. And the sound of that dog is a symbol, basically an arbitrary representation of the actual animal of a dog, right? When you say dog, it doesn't sound like a dog, so it definitely has no relation to it, but we are putting those two things together and connecting them. Of course, these symbols can be spoken, can be written, can be presented in a tactile format. Tactile basically means touchable, right? Sensory. An example would be Braille. Can be formed with hand shapes, such as sign language then. There are abstract symbols. Abstract symbols are letters, right? Because letters really mean nothing. We just learn about this format of lettering, and then we're like, okay, well, this is what we'll use. And then we can actually make millions of words out of these letters, right? There's also line drawings, icons. Icons are kind of like the standard. Pictures, there's photographs, and then concrete systems, which are the actual real things. So when you select symbols, it's probably something in between, or maybe even the letters, right, of this grouping of words. They're also transparent, which are photographs and real objects. So basically you can see exactly what it is. There's opaque. Opaque means it's not necessarily very clear, it's hard to see through, which are basically written words in Braille. And it's hard to see because you need to know how to read if you're going to put words. If the person doesn't know how to read, these words mean nothing to them, right? So that's why it's called opaque. And then there's that middle area called translucent. Translucent is kind of see-through, but not sure. And those are some of the symbols that are obvious, but others are more abstract. So let's say a rain cloud. It could represent rain, but it could also mean a sad day, right? So that means depending on the context of the situation, how people are using it, it could be one or the other. So it means, it's sort of maybe the right word or the right feeling, but it doesn't necessarily mean the right same thing to everyone. And of course, line drawings, there is Boardmaker, widget symbols, and symbol sticks, which are ones that the book recommends, and they are actually very, very popular. Boardmaker is probably the most popular of the three. So let's talk about the guide to meaningful vocabulary. Like we said before, when it comes to language, we want to have these considerations when you're, let's say, programming or selecting the words and the grid that you're going to use with your student. So provide messages that enable the student to greet other students and begin a conversation. So again, remember, what's up, or hey, or whatever it is. Include vocabulary that enables the student to comment on events and activities, both as a way to express his or her or their own opinion, as a way to continue a conversation. So it might be, it might be, yeah, it might be, something in between those words. Provide vocabulary that includes specific people who are important in the student's life so they can be called. So if you're going to personalize a communication device, you might even put a picture of the mom, picture of the dad, picture of the siblings, pictures of their best friends, picture of their teacher, so that it's not a abstract symbol of a teacher. It literally is that teacher. So they can press it and go, Professor Kier or whatever, or mom or dad, and not just like a picture of a woman or a man. It's actual specific people so that they can refer to those people directly. Include favorite activities or objects to enable students to request them. So if they really, really love to, let's say, play Pokemon Go, which is very specific, maybe there's a little symbol of a Pokemon Go on there so that they can just press it and not say, I want to play a video game and the video game is called, you know, and then Pokemon or whatever. Instead, it's just really direct. They can just point at it and everyone will know. Make sure the student has a way of conveying his or her or their feelings, such as, that makes me angry. Or include a method of protest, such as, I don't want to do that, or I need a break, or I want to be alone. So you might actually put those things in there with a little abstract symbol so that they can relate to that specific feeling. Use age-appropriate and culturally sensitive words and phrases, including slang, as we've talked about before, how that's really important because they want to feel like they're part of the crew, the group of people that they hang out with. And of course, incorporate humor and sarcasm if it is age-appropriate. So you might even have a thing that says, like, duh, or whatever. I don't really know what young kids are saying. This is what I would say. Okay, now let's talk about some of the features when it comes to communication. The low-tech augmentative communication is printed on paper or plastic plexi boards, and we'll actually see a copy of that. It's for usually people who might have paraplegia, where they actually can't move a lot, and they're dependent on the eye gaze, maybe, of the person to be able to communicate. And we'll actually see a sample of that as well. Device has multiple overlays that is inserted, maybe a physical barrier for some users. So remember we were talking about that, like that mid-tech thing that we were talking about before. When you pull it in and out, the little sheets, some people physically cannot do that, or it's a struggle, right? So that might be something that this person might not be able to use. The picture here that you see on the slide is of just a basic book with them in kind of like a laminated square, and each one has Velcro on the back, so they can pull them off and then put them into, let's say, a sentence structure. So it might be something like, I want to eat pizza, and then they can put it all together and it forms sentences, and then that person can then show it to, let's say, their parents or their teacher or their friends, and then, you know, everyone will understand what's going on. So when we talk about the different types of visuals on the device, there's two types. There's dynamic display, which we talked about a little bit about before, and there's also visual scene display. But let me repeat and explain those two things. Dynamic display is vocabulary is shown as text and or graphics on a touch screen. As one symbol is selected, the screen can go to another set of words or images. So the example is, let's say that you have a grid and it says, it's basically all the major things that the student does every day, right? So in the morning, it might be breakfast, right? So you will then also go to school and then come home, do homework, right? And then also, let's say, watch television. So that means there's food, there's, let's say, school, and then there is like entertainment, right? So, or fun stuff. So the first page might actually have the word food, fun, school, right? And when they touch it, let's say they touch food, then it opens up to breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, right? And then they touch it again, and then let's say they touch breakfast, and it would be banana, cereal, milk, or whatever it is. So that's what it means when it says a dynamic display. When you touch it, it opens up another screen, and when you touch that, it opens up another screen to get more and more specific, or it narrows it down to specific words, okay? Then there's a visual scene display. When users need contextual clues. So that means environmental clues, right? When we hear the word context, that means the environment. So let's give you an example, like here on this slide, you see a little picture of a kitchen or a cartoon picture of a kitchen, right? And then you'll notice that there are different hotspots that the child or the user can point to. So instead of displaying symbols in rows and columns, a visual scene display begins with a large picture that provides a context for more detailed information. Again, some users will need this, some users will be fine with the grid, right? So the example here is a kitchen where the user can point to the refrigerator for food, the sink for washing hands, the countertop as a place to eat. Then there is now different types of selection. Okay, the first one is called direct selection, and the other one's called scanning. So direct selection is a reliable point, right? So that means using a finger to reliably point at something, or it could be a pointing device such as a head stick or a mouth stick or a chin stick, or it could be an infrared beam or an eye gaze. So it really does depend. And then there's scanning. So for people who can't actually do those types of pointing, there's a presentation of graphic symbols in a sequential manner so that the user can respond once a desired symbol is identified. So here I actually have two examples. I would recommend you watch the top one for sure. The bottom one is actually my students. As an assignment, they had to download an AEIOU chart, and then they would actually try to communicate with each other by just scanning, okay? So the example here you see is on that plexi board that we were talking about. The hole in the middle is cut so that they can see each other, let's say the assistant and the person, let's say with paraplegia or who can't just move at the moment for some reason. And then you see the ABC 1, 2, 3, and they're actually on both sides. Okay, so that when that person is looking, let's say at the upper left-hand corner, the person who's trying to communicate with them will say, oh, are you trying to spell a word or is it a number? So they might do something like A, 1. And then while they're saying A and 1, depending on which one they want, the letter or the number, the person might blink because that's all they can do, right? So let's say if I said A and he doesn't blink, and I say 1, he does blink. I'm like, okay, 1. So is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? And then during that 3 numbers, they would blink again for the number that they want. Okay? So it might be 1, no blink, 2, no blink, 3, blink. Then I know that means that the person wants to say the number 3. Okay, but it's really great to see it once you get the hang of it, which is the partner assisted scanning video, the top link, which is fantastic because you're like, whoa, you don't actually even need to spell a lot of words as you get to know the person. You can just, kind of use abbreviations or codes and stuff like that. It's really fun to watch. Okay. And then here actually is a AEIOU chart, which you can see is on the left side, and it's a scanning. So this here would be the same thing that I was just discussing before. So the person would go A, E, I, O, U, and in one of those letters, the communicator wants to blink at the right one. And then once that says they blink on the E, you might go E, F, G, H, new word, start again. And then they would blink at which one they want, and then you would go to the next letter. So it sounds pretty exciting, right? But it also is really slow if you've never done it before, or until you get to use of it, right? And a lot of times after a while, you don't even need this chart anymore. But for this class, I used to actually have the students partner up in class and try it out and try to spell a sentence or communicate a sentence. It's fun. It's a learning experience, and it's really, really interesting. And of course, it really does depend on who it is who may use it. I'll give you an actual personal example. My father had ALS, and so he started to lose the use of his muscles. So slowly, all he could do was just look and blink. And so I actually tried to implement this, and it worked for a little bit. But my father also, I don't think, was able to just spell everything. He was in his late 70s, so he used it for a little bit, but then after a while, he just stopped using it. And also, it depends on the language. If my dad spoke one language and let's say I don't speak that language or I don't know how to read and write in that language, then I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, But, and he didn't really spell a lot of English, so I would actually have to write down what he wrote or what he was trying to tell me to try to add it up, or ask someone to tell me what does this mean, or I would use my phone to do a Google Translate. So it can actually be very, very tiresome and bothersome or complicated as well. Other features, there's also the dedicated system and the non-dedicated system. So the dedicated system is a standalone device designed specifically for augmentative communication. So here you'll see right there is the Tobii Dynavox. And what it is just a device for the augmentative communication, and that is it. A non-dedicated system is a generic electronic device that has been designed for the general public, such as the laptop, tablet, or smartphone, right? But the thing is that there's an app that you can use that's on there. But the problem is, for some people, all those other things that you can use an iPad for can be distracting for that student. right? But it's also a lot cheaper. A Dynavox device could be like $5,000. And sometimes um, funders, let's say the Department of Rehab or whomever, might want to only buy this because they know that the iPad could be used for other things. So they will say, well, are you really getting it for the iPad or are you really using it for just the communication component, right? But there is a way to lock an iPad. So for non-dedicated systems such as the iPad, they have a feature called guided access that enables adults to limit a child's ability to exit a specific app so they're not distracted by the other apps. So that's something that you should be able to or be aware of so that you can, argue the purchase of a $400 iPad or a $5,000 Dynavox. Okay. And also, having an iPad or a tablet makes the student or the user feel like everyone else. When they have this bigger device, and the Dynavox are tend to be a lot bigger and clunkier, and they look different, right? So people are going to go, "What is that?" And that's going to draw attention, and they might not necessarily want that attention. So here are some examples of augmentative communication apps for mobile devices. There's the Proloquo to Go, which is probably the most popular one of this group. There's also Go Talk Now series, LAMP, Words for Life, Speak for Yourself, PandaPal, Touch Chat, Seen and Heard, Tap Speak Choice, and the Tobii Sono Flex. There's a lot of actual brands from Tobii or models that are from Tobii as well. But you can also, I think I had you guys download a Lexicom, which is the one that I discovered and I use. And it's actually quite fun. There's actually other ones too, where I remember there wasn't actually an app um, where you could order Starbucks. So you can choose the size, hot or cold or ice or whatever, uh, all the flavors, and then the actual drinks and all that stuff. And you press all the ones you want, and then you press talk, and then it would say it out loud to the person who is the cashier at Starbucks. There was also another one just specifically for McDonald's as well. So I think that's great that they are start to do that, so that they're being more inclusive of the people who are ordering food or drinks at a specific location.